So in cellular respiration, we can talk about aerobic cellular respiration. In bacteria, we can also talk about anaerobic cellular respiration. What is the main difference? If you look at this chart may not make sense to you unless you read your soft chalk alongside of it. So you're reading your soft chalk and you're looking at the chart, then it'll make sense to you. But these are the steps of cellular respiration: glycolysis, pyruvate oxidation, the Krebs cycle, and oxidative phosphorylation. And if you notice, whether it's aerobic or not, they're both the same. The only difference is the final electron acceptor. In aerobic cellular respiration, the final electron acceptor is oxygen. And that's why it's called aerobic cellular respiration. In anaerobic cellular respiration, you obviously can tell it's not oxygen because it's anaerobic. It is something other than oxygen. And the three alternatives to oxygen that we talk about in this class is sulfate, carbonate, and nitrate. We can't do that. We can't do this one. We can only do aerobic cellular respiration, and that's why you're breathing oxygen. And you have to breathe oxygen. But bacteria, some of them can do the aerobic, others can do the anaerobic. Which ones? The ones that are flexible. Remember? Facultative. Another word for facultative is flexible. So the facultative anaerobe, they can do aerobic cellular respiration when oxygen is available. But they can also do anaerobic cellular respiration when oxygen is not available. They can also do fermentation. That's why we call them flexible, facultative anaerobes. But we also mentioned that they do prefer oxygen. And the reason behind it is, you can see it right here, the yield. They make more ATP when they're using aerobic cellular respiration than when they're using anaerobic cellular respiration. Look at the range from 2 to 38. Now what they make depends on which one of these they're going to use. So they are obviously more efficient with oxygen, and that's why, what do we say? Facultative anaerobes prefer oxygen, but they can still survive without oxygen. But they prefer oxygen, and the main reason behind it is because they make more ATP out of each glucose when oxygen is available. Well, that's just like you. Why are you breathing oxygen? Because you do this one, aerobic cellular respiration. You make more ATP per glucose when you are consuming oxygen than when you're not. The only time we're not consuming oxygen is fermentation. The only yield with fermentation is 2 ATP. That's it. We can't survive off of that. There's no way. Everything about you screams, I need ATP. Your heart beating, your brain activity, your muscle contractions, everything says, I need ATP. And 2 ATP will not cut it. You can't survive off of that. Now, some bacteria can, but you can't. You need a high demand, or you have a high demand of ATP, so you need a high yield. Per glucose, the maximum yield is 38, and I teach based on the maximum yield. The actual yield will vary, but we just learn it based on maximum yield. Maximum yield per glucose is 38 ATPs in the presence of oxygen. In the absence of oxygen, the maximum yield for us is 2 ATPs. That's it. Now, if you're an obligate aerobe, like some bacteria are, you can only do aerobic cellular respiration. That's what obligate aerobe means. I must have oxygen. Why? Because I can't do anything other than cellular respiration, aerobic cellular respiration. So if you look up here, the obligate aerobes only do aerobic cellular respiration. Facultative anaerobes, they're flexible. They can do the aerobic cellular respiration, the anaerobic, and the fermentation. If you are an obligate anaerobe, you can do anaerobic cellular respiration or fermentation. Some bacteria are like that. If the bacteria is a microaerophile, what that means, it uses oxygen in lower concentration than atmospheric oxygen. The oxygen that you're breathing right now in the air, it's about 21% concentration. That's too much for these guys, for the microaerophiles. So they can do aerobic cellular respiration, but they need less oxygen than 21%. Look at the air tolerance. The air tolerance, they don't care if oxygen is there or not because they don't use it and it doesn't hurt them because they only ferment. So air tolerance, they only ferment. That's it. So when it comes to an air tolerant, the maximum yield is 2 ATP per glucose. That's it, because they only ferment. You should be aware of this table here, what each type of bacteria can do with respect to cellular respiration. All right, let's move on. So we already went through the overall formula for cellular respiration. Now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of the actual reaction. Here's what I'm going to tell you. I'm going to use the prokaryote as the example. But I'm also going to expect you to know the eukaryotes. The good news is that you can overlay the eukaryotic cellular respiration right on top of the prokaryotic, because they're exactly the same. Thank God. The only difference is location of things. So unless I say something else, unless I say otherwise, everything I'm saying with the prokaryote is exactly the same as the eukaryote. So if you know one, you know the other one. And I will mention where they're different. And you'll notice most of the things that I will mention where they're different is going to be the location of things, where things happen. So here we go. Glucose, which is a 6-carbon molecule, will enter the cell and will find itself in the cell's cytoplasm. And it doesn't matter if you're talking about eukaryote or prokaryote. The same thing happens. The glucose enters the cell. The glucose is a 6-carbon molecule. And now it finds itself in the cytoplasm. In the cytoplasm, what's going to happen is glyco means sugar, lysis, breakdown. It's actually pronounced glycolysis. So the breakdown of sugar. I just wanted to break it down for you so you know what it means. Glyco means sugar, lysis means breaking down. So the sugar is going to break down. Yeah, the 6-carbon glucose will start breaking down. So what you eventually are going to notice here is this is what's happening to the glucose. Look up here, please. You have 6 carbon represented by my fingers here. Here they are, 6 carbons. If you blink, you'll miss it. This is glycolysis. There it is. That's it. Let me ask you a question. Did I lose any carbons? I did not. So if you reverse it, there it is. This is how it started. Break. That's glycolysis. That's it. Where is this happening? In the cytoplasm. Now, nothing happens, nothing, until you put some energy into it. So you actually have to use 2 ATPs to get this started. Now, some students tell me at this point, wait a minute. Isn't the objective of cellular respiration, isn't it to make ATP? Yeah, it is actually. So what are you doing using it? That's a very good question. My analogy to this is this. You invite everybody for a July 4th picnic. And you got the raw hamburgers and the hot dogs and everything is good. And you forget the sparker for the barbecue. They're not gonna be happy. Nobody wants to eat a raw hamburger. They're not gonna be happy. So you got everything ready and you invited all your friends and family and you forgot the sparker. And if you forget the sparker, then you don't have a barbecue. This is the sparker. The initial investment of ATP is equivalent to you showing up to that barbecue with a sparker. Spark. That's this one. What are you gonna have? A fire. This is the fire. The rest of this is the fire. The rest of cellular respiration is the fire. Without the spark, you will not have the fire. Hopefully you understand the analogy. The investment, the first 2 ATPs that you invest, that's required, it's mandatory for you to start the fire. So don't worry about it. You're gonna put in 2 ATPs, yeah, but at the end of it, you're gonna end up making 38 ATPs. That's a nice yield. I wish my money in the bank behaved this way. I'd be a rich man and retire early. But it doesn't behave that way, unfortunately. If you put in $2 and you get 38 back, oh, that's a good, I'll give them all my money. You see what I mean? But unfortunately, the way banks are going, you put $2, you get $2.01. That doesn't grow that fast. You'll have to wait a very, very long time to get to $2.10. So that's the way it goes, unfortunately. But in this case, it's a very good yield. 2 ATPs, yeah, I'll give you a fire. So the first 2 ATPs is the spark that lights the fire. Now we know why these 2 ATPs are absolutely required. So let's do it again. The 6-carbon glucose enters the cell. It now finds itself in the cell's cytoplasm. How many carbons does glucose have? 6. Spark, and it does this. Now you think these are pyruvates now. No, they're not. They're actually glyceraldehyde 3-phosphates. Once you break down the glucose, you actually make 2 molecules of G3P. Glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. Now you got to look at the picture here. One of the G3Ps is initially dihydroxyacetone phosphate. We added in there for completion so that if you look at a book or something, you see the same thing. I don't care for you to really know this, but you should include it in your flowchart. But with this understanding, the dihydroxyacetone phosphate can immediately, as soon as it's made, be converted to G3P. It all depends on the cell's needs. And I would need to teach you 2 or 3 lectures of biochemistry to teach you what's going on with this guy. But in a nutshell, what happens with dihydroxyacetone phosphate depends on the cell's needs. If the cell says, we need ATP, yeah, we need ATP, so you have to take the dihydroxyacetone, convert it to G3P, so you can keep going this way to get ATP. Okay, well, we don't need that much ATP, so we can use this one, but we need this guy to make something else, so we'll go that way. The hydroxyacetone phosphate, you can use it to go multiple ways. This is just one way that will take you through and make ATP. But I can use dihydroxyacetone to make other things. Depends on the cell's needs. And you have to take biochemistry to see how complicated this thing really is. You know, if I have a cell sitting in front of us right now, and it's looking at the screen, the cell will be insulted. That's not all I do. I do a lot more than that. Yeah, it does a lot more than that. I got arrows going all over the place. What are you talking about? Yeah. You should take a look at one of those charts that shows you the interconnectedness of all these cellular pathways. It will blow your mind. And that is called amphibolism. It is one of the slides that we will talk about probably on Thursday. How everything is connected to each other through these chemical reactions. We're just showing you a piece of it. But if you ever go online or whatever, or in a biochemistry textbook, and step back and take a look at the overall picture of it, it will blow your mind away. How all these things are interconnected, and it's fascinating where all these things can take you. I can, for example, from dihydroxyacetone and pyruvate and acetyl-CoA, and that we're going to talk about, I can make sugar actually. I can make sugar instead of breaking it down. I can make it, and it's something called, you don't need to know this, gluconeogenesis. The making of new sugars, gluconeogenesis. And it's another set of pathways. I can convert things back to fat. So acetyl-CoA, for example, I can take acetyl-CoA and make fat out of it if I need to do that. Or cholesterol, or whatever I need to do. It's amazing, the interconnectedness of things. Thank God we're not doing all that. We're only looking at the breakdown of sugar. So, you just write this here with the understanding that in biochemistry, this will get a lot worse if you ever take biochemistry. But for our purposes, this dihydroxyacetone phosphate will become G3P. So at this stage, what do I have? I have glucose that entered the cell, spark 2 ATPs, am I right? Now I have 2 G3Ps. Where is all of this happening? Cytoplasm. Very good. Did I need ATP? Yes. Absolutely. Now, I'm trying to be nice to you. This green arrow right here is actually about 5 or 6 reactions that I summarized for you. And collectively, they're called the energy investment phase. And I think it makes sense why. Because you are investing how many ATPs? 2 of them. So right away, at this point right here, you're already in the hole with 2 ATPs. But the rest of the way, you're going to be making energy. You're going to be making ATP. And that's why I say spark on the barbecue. Yeah, you're using a little bit of energy, yeah. But what? You're about to convert it into a fire. This starts the fire. The glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate will break down, will release electrons, and will release hydrogen and become pyruvate. Each G3P, that's what will happen to it. It will give off electrons and hydrogen and become pyruvate. Did it lose carbon? No. I don't lose carbon at all in glycolysis. At the end, I still have 6 carbons. They're just 2 molecules of pyruvates, 3 carbons each. When the G3P gives off the electrons and hydrogen, the electrons and the hydrogen go get loaded on an empty U-Haul truck. NAD+, the oxidized NAD. So the electrons and hydrogen coming off of here will eventually end up reducing NAD+ into NADH. So I call this one a loaded U-Haul truck NADH is a loaded U-Haul truck loaded with what? Electrons and hydrogen. We call that reduced. So you're reducing NAD plus to make it NADH. The same thing is going to happen to this glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. Whatever is happening here is also happening here. So I'm making another truck as well. So at the end, I will have 2 pyruvates and I will have 2 NADHs. During this process, which is again another 5 or 6 reactions here too. Thank God we're not getting into that detail. Another 5 or 6 reactions here too. 2 ATPs are made for this, and 2 ATPs are made for this one. Those 4 ATPs that are made by substrate level phosphorylation. We talked about that the last time we were together. Substrate level phosphorylation is the simple way of making ATP. When the phosphate is removed from a substrate and given to ADP. That's the simple way of making ATP. All 4 of these are made this way. The 4 ATPs made in glycolysis, they're made by substrate level phosphorylation that I refer to as SLP. At the end of glycolysis, what do we have? We have 2 pyruvates. Do you agree? Each one of them is how many carbons? 3. Did I lose carbon?
No.
I didn't lose any carbon. Even the electrons and the hydrogen that came off of G3P, I didn't lose them. I loaded them on NAD plus to make it NADH. Very good. But I also made 4 ATPs. By what process? SLP. But hang on. I was already in the hole for 2 ATPs, am I right? And I made 4 ATPs. What's the net gain?
2.
The net gain is 2. I make 4, but I use 2. Now what do I have to show for it? 2. Watch out on the lecture exam. Is the question asking you how many ATPs are made? If that's the case, it's 4. Or is the question asking you about the net gain of ATP? And in that case, it's 2. Be careful. So this is glycolysis. Questions? Okay, good. Pyruvate. At this point, pyruvate has to be removed. No doubt about it. I don't care how you get rid of it. You gotta get rid of it. Why do you want to get rid of it? Just let it build, let it accumulate. No, you cannot let pyruvate accumulate because of what we potentially, hopefully learned in Gen Bio. And actually we learned on Thursday. The product of a reaction, which this is, pyruvate is the product of these reactions, yeah? If it accumulates, it can negatively feedback inhibit the enzyme that made it. All of these arrows have enzymes involved. This pyruvate, if it builds up in high concentration, some of the pyruvate can allosterically inhibit the enzyme that made it. You don't want that. You don't want that. Shutting down glycolysis? That's not good. You won't survive that. You can't shut down glycolysis. You gotta keep it moving. That's what's keeping you alive. Even if you rely on just these 4 ATPs, at least you're making some. You shut this down, it's done. This cell is dead. There's no way. You can't do that. So the only way to avoid negative feedback inhibition, which basically is the buildup of ATP turning off glycolysis, is to get rid of pyruvate. The buildup of pyruvate, I mean. The buildup of pyruvate that turns off glycolysis. The only way to avoid it is to get rid of pyruvate. That's it. And as you get rid of pyruvate, it keeps glycolysis going. And the cell doesn't care how you get rid of pyruvate. What it cares is you get rid of pyruvate. Now it would prefer that you get rid of it in the presence of oxygen, because you can do a lot more with it versus in the absence of oxygen. So there are two possibilities. In the absence of oxygen, the pyruvate will be reduced into something like, for us, into lactic acid. And we call that fermentation. In the absence of oxygen, the pyruvate will ferment. Again, that also means you're getting rid of it. It does not care how you get rid of it. You just have to get rid of it. The only difference is the yield of ATP will be different. So in the absence of oxygen, our cells, for example, and some bacteria, they do the same thing like us. They will ferment the pyruvate by reducing it into lactic acid. And that's equivalent to you shoveling it out of there. In other cases, or other situations, it will oxidize the pyruvate. In the presence of oxygen, you will oxidize the pyruvate. Oxidizing pyruvate means you break it down. And we'll see into what. Now, if you're not paying attention with me, you're going to think I said something that I did not say. And I know that from previous students. You probably think I said that oxygen is involved in the oxidation of pyruvate. I never said that. That's not what I'm saying here. You got to pay attention to this because it's tricky. What I'm saying is this. At the point of pyruvate, the cell has to make a decision. It knows it has to get rid of pyruvate. That's for sure. But it has to decide how it's going to get rid of it. Do I reduce it or do I oxidize it? So what it's going to do is look and see, do I have oxygen? If the answer is no, then it will reduce it, which means ferment it. Do I have oxygen? Yes, oxygen is here. Then I will oxidize it. I never said that oxygen is involved in the oxidation of pyruvate. That is not what I'm saying. What I'm trying to say to you is, and you'll see what I mean when we go through it, is the steps that takes pyruvate and oxidizes it, and then after that the Krebs cycle, and then after that oxidative phosphorylation. There's so many steps. And it's very complex. The last step is where oxygen is involved. It would be foolish to go this way and then be surprised at the end. Oh, oxygen is not here. The cell is dead at this moment. So it doesn't want to die like that. So it decides to do this cleverly. Instead of me committing to pyruvate oxidation, the Krebs cycle, and then oxidative phosphorylation, and then find out that oxygen was never there to begin with, and risk dying, it is much smarter, to check first before I commit. So it's just checking. is oxygen here? That's it. I am not saying that oxygen is involved in the oxidation of pyruvate. I never said that. What I'm saying is pyruvate will check to see oxygen is there because it knows it's about to commit to a series of reactions that the end of them requires oxygen. And it would be foolish to get caught off guard. Because if that happens, that cell is immediately dead. So it's clever. Why do I go through all of this and risk dying? If oxygen is not there, I have an alternative, fermentation. That's what it will do. So at the point of pyruvate, the cell will check if oxygen is present or not. If it is not present, the pyruvate will be fermented. Into what? We'll talk about it on Thursday. We're going to talk about the scenario when oxygen is present. It's going to do the big one. It's going to do the oxidation, the pyruvate oxidation, followed by the Krebs cycle, followed by oxidative phosphorylation. So let's do it. Pyruvate, I am pyruvate. Is oxygen here? Yes. I will go this way. On Thursday, I'm going to say no, and I will go and do the fermentation. But for today, oxygen is present. So let's see what happens. Yeah.
Just curious, when there's no oxygen present and lactic acid becomes reduced, do those electrons come from like the NAD?
Ah, beautiful question. Beautiful question. Yes.
Okay,
We'll
so
talk
they
about
swap
it.
them off.
We'll talk about it on Thursday.
Okay.
Yeah. We'll talk about. I don't want to confuse you. We're gonna do the oxygen one first, and on Thursday I will show you what happens with fermentation. You are absolutely right. Now, when oxygen is present, pyruvate will be oxidized. Another word for oxidize means it will break down. And when it breaks down, it will release electrons and hydrogen. But in this case, it will also release a carbon. Uh-oh, here we go. We're starting to lose the carbons. The 3-carbon pyruvate, here it is. 3-carbon pyruvate, look up here, will undergo pyruvate oxidation by losing a carbon. It will lose a carbon. That's the carbon that it's losing. And the leftover is the 2-carbon acetyl-CoA. That's pyruvate oxidation. In prokaryotes, that's happening in the cytoplasm, because they don't have compartments, so everything happens in the cytoplasm. So some of the CO2 that you're breathing out right now is this one right here. CO2 is the garbage of cellular respiration. Some of the electrons and hydrogens will then be loaded on another truck to make NADH. Now you have 2 pyruvates. So the same thing is going to happen to the other pyruvate. It will lose CO2, it will become acetyl-CoA, and it will make another NADH. So look at the numbers. When you flowchart your cellular respiration from memory, real soon, your numbers have to match mine. And if they don't, you're missing something. That means you're not done remembering the charts. Your numbers have to match mine. The carbons, the ATPs, the CO2s, the NADHs, the NAD pluses, all of it. The names, everything has to match. And until they match 5 times in a row, you're not done working on this chart. So this is pyruvate oxidation. Now, some mistake students make. They think, and hopefully you don't think this, these two NADHs are the same NADHs that I talked about before. No, they're not. The other NADHs I talked about were produced in glycolysis. These NADHs are produced in pyruvate oxidation. So how many NADHs do I have total right now? 4 of them. So right now, where I stand, right now, at the end of pyruvate oxidation, what do I have? I have 4 NADHs. Do you agree? I have 2 acetyl-CoAs. Do you agree? And each acetyl-CoA is made up of how many carbons? 2. I have 2 CO2s. Do you agree? But those CO2s just simply come out. They're garbage. Now we breathe them out. But how did they come out of our cells? Simple diffusion, because they're gas. And these are bacteria. They're just cells. So these will leave the bacteria by simple diffusion. They go right through the membrane. So even though we have 2 CO2s, they don't last in the cell for long. They just diffuse out. But what else do we have? We have 4 NADHs, 2 acetyl-CoAs, 2 CO2s. Am I right? But we also have a net gain of how many ATPs? 2 ATPs, made in glycolysis. The pyruvate oxidation that we have in eukaryotic cells, the reaction is exactly the same. Look at the screen. The only difference is where it actually happens. It happens when pyruvate is entering the mitochondria. Now this is eukaryotic. This is you and I. As the pyruvate enters the mitochondria, it loses a carbon in the form of CO2. It loads NADH, NAD plus to make it NADH. It becomes acetyl-CoA. The actual reaction is exactly the same. You know what I did when I created this picture? I copied this to here. And the only thing I did is put what looks like a mitochondrial membrane. That's it. It's exactly the same event. The location is different. This is mitochondrial. This is cytoplasm. All right, let the fun begin. Hopefully you're staying attentive with me. So in the shaded area, we show you glycolysis so that you can continue to look at it while you're looking at pyruvate oxidation. Here's pyruvate oxidation. Here are the 2 acetyl-CoAs, the NADHs, the CO2s. I got it. Because there's oxygen available, the pyruvates will oxidize, in this case, so far, to acetyl-CoA. Each acetyl-CoA will turn the Krebs cycle once. 1 turn of the Krebs cycle per acetyl-CoA, but we have how many acetyl-CoAs? 2 per glucose. So we're going to turn the cycle twice. And the answer to your question is yes. And the question is, do I need to remember all that? Yes. So we're done with that. You definitely need to remember all this. And it's not that bad. It starts with acetyl-CoA, listen to the word, combining with oxaloacetate. I never said, and I will never say, even though you're going to think I said it, that acetyl-CoA becomes oxaloacetate. I never said that. Or you may think that oxaloacetate becomes acetyl-CoA. I never said that. What I'm saying is 2 plus 4 is 6. That's what I'm saying. The 2 carbon of acetyl-CoA will combine with, you can tell it's a problem for students, the 4 carbon of oxaloacetate to make the 6 carbon citrate. That's what I'm saying. The way this is drawn, it's showing you that the oxaloacetate will combine with, the acetyl-CoA will combine with oxaloacetate to make citrate. I always start the Krebs cycle from the citrate because of all the tricks that I have up my sleeve that I will about to share with you, so you can start using them to remember this monster. The first trick is a mnemonic that you're gonna write down, and you'll see what I'm saying. Can I add, write the mnemonic. Can I add some syrup for my oatmeal? I'll say it again. The can starts with C, like citrate starts with C. I for isocitrate. Add for the A in the alpha ketoglutarate. Some for the succinyl-CoA. Syrup for the succinate. For the fumarate. My for the malate. Oatmeal for oxaloacetate. Now, when I'm asked to draw this thing from memory, I'm not going to write, can I add some syrup? I will write the first letter. C-I-A-S-S-F, right? My, oatmeal, M-Y, M-O, I mean. And then I remember can is citrate, so I write the rest of it, citrate. I is isocitrate, then I write the rest of it, and so forth. Then you have to remember this, because you have to overlay both of them on top of each other. You have to remember this number, 665. 665, and a group of 5 fours. 665 and 5 fours. That means 4, 4, 4, 4, 4. 665 and a group of 5 fours. You should play that lottery today, maybe you'll win. Now I can overlay both of them. Watch this. Can is C for citrate. 6. Citrate is a 6 carbon molecule. I for isocitrate is the other 6 carbon molecule. 6, 6, 5, right? So the next one should have 5. All right. Well, that's the add for alpha ketoglutarate. That's a 5 carbon. Can I add some is succinyl-CoA, and that's the first 4. 6, 6, 5, a group of 5 fours. That's the first 4. By the way, the rest of them are 4s. So can I add some syrup, which is succinate, 4, which is also 4 carbon. 4 is fumarate, 4 carbon. My malate, 4 carbon. Oatmeal oxaloacetate, 4 carbon. So with the mnemonic and the 66554s, you can overlay it. Now, why do you need to know that? Because look at the screen. Every time the number goes down, it means you lost CO2. Watch this. It was 3 carbons at pyruvate. It became 2 carbons as acetyl-CoA. Am I right? Did I lose a carbon? Yeah. That's why I made CO2. And you have to write this phrase exactly like I'm about to say it. If you make a mistake in writing it, you're going to get yourself into trouble. And the phrase is this. Every time I make a carbon, I make NADH. And you have to say it exactly like that. Because if you say it the other way, you would be wrong. Every time I make a carbon, I make NADH. And when do I make a carbon? When my number decreases. I'm already showing you tricks to remembering this thing. Did my number decrease from 3 to 2? Yes, that means I made CO2, which means I also made NADH. Look up here. Did my number go from 6 to 5? Yes, that means I made a carbon and I made NADH. Did my number go from 5 to 4? Yes, that means I make a carbon and I make NADH. Every time I lose a carbon, or I make a carbon, I make NADH. Now, if you by mistake say it the other way, you'd be wrong. Now, I'm about to say it the wrong way, so don't listen to me all the way. Every time I make NADH, I lose a carbon. That is not true. Because I made NADH here. Did I lose carbon? No. Very soon, I'm going to make NADH here, but I will not lose carbon either. That's why I said, you have to say my phrase exactly like I said it. Every time I lose a carbon, I make NADH. And now you're starting, actually you can think in your mind, you're actually filling out the Krebs cycle in your mind. Can I add some syrup for my oatmeal? The 66554s. You overlay them. And then you look for the number. Oh, when it goes from 6 to 5, yeah, I lost the carbon, I made NADH. When it goes from 5 to 4, I lost the carbon, I made NADH. So I'm already helping you remember this part. Now watch this one. It's gonna sound weird, but it's okay. It's okay to be weird for a little bit. Because you're talking about many decades later. I still remember this. I know this. I can draw this in my sleep. Between the two sounding words, you make ATP by SLP. This ATP is made by SLP. And that's important to know. So between the succinyl-CoA and the succinate, I take advantage of the two S's. To remember that ATP is made by SLP. Here's another weird one. By the time I get to fumarate, I make FADH2. You gotta look for trends. How do I remember this thing? You look for those things and you come up with these things. So I'm giving you a helping hand. You don't have to use what I'm telling you. But I know students who use it remember this thing for life. When you get to fumarate, that's when you make the other truck. FADH2, by the way, that's the only place where you're making FADH2. Remember, look at all the other trucks. They're all NADHs. That's why I call NADH the U-Haul truck. They're everywhere. You see the difference? See the idea here? Where once in a while, you see a Penske. Now, from fumarate to malate, my Gen Bio students, what did I tell you to remember?
It's boring.
Yeah, it's boring. There's nothing going on. Nothing that you need to worry about. From malate to oxaloacetate, all of a sudden I remember my alphabetical order. Watch. MNO. And it works. You apply those helping hands 2 or 3 times, you will be amazed when you remember it by Thursday. Do we understand each other? You never know what I'm going to be up to on Thursday. Because I'm going to be done with this today. And I'm going to send you home with it, with the understanding that you will do something about it by Thursday. You never know. So please, get on it right away. There's no time to waste. Every day you waste, you will regret it. When you force yourself to learn it in a day and a half or so and you realize, I can't do this in a short period of time, But I didn't give you a short period of time. I gave you from tonight. Starting tonight until exam day, you have plenty of days. This is not on the next exam, it's on the third exam. So you have plenty of time. So you start studying it tonight. Once you start applying these tricks, it's not that difficult. Maybe the only difficult part would be the spelling. But that's okay. The exam is multiple choice anyways. So, good. Alright. So now at this stage, what do we have? With respect to the NADHs and the FADH2s and the ATPs, what do we have? We have a total of 10 NADHs. Let's count them. There are 2 NADHs from glycolysis. Do you agree? We make 2 more in pyruvate oxidation. Do you agree? That's 4. Per turn, you make 3 NADHs. Here they are. 1, 2, 3. That's per turn. But how many turns? 2. So you have 6. So that's a total of what? 10 NADHs. So we have 10 NADHs. Okay. How many FADH2s do we make total? Only 2. This one and this one. That's it. So 2 FADH2s. All right. Let's not forget about the ATPs. How many ATPs did we make in glycolysis? The net gain? 2 from glycolysis. By what process? SLP. 2 ATPs from, ATP from glycolysis by SLP. Very good. Did we make any other ATPs? Where? In the Krebs cycle. How many total? 2. By what process? Also SLP. 2 more ATPs. But now it's Krebs cycle. Also by SLP. So far we have 4 ATPs. Do you agree? Good. Now, the other ATPs are going to be made by the trucks. The 10 NADHs and the 2 FADH2s. Those are the guys that are going to make the other ATPs. And I'll give you a heads up kind of thing. Each NADH will make a maximum of 3 ATPs. So that's the conversion. 1 NADH gives you 3 ATPs, but we have 10 NADHs. So how many are we going to make? 30. Good. 1 FADH2 makes a maximum of 2 ATPs, but we have 2 FADH2. So how many are we going to make? 4. That's a total of 34. Do you agree? There's your 38. 4 from SLP and 34 from, watch this, oxidative phosphorylation. The hard way of making ATP. So now I'm about to show you how the trucks make the 34 ATPs by oxidative phosphorylation. The machinery for oxidative phosphorylation in bacteria is located in the cell membrane. Here it is. It's made up of 4 complexes, collectively called the electron transport chain, complex 1, 2, 3, and 4, along with ubiquinone, that's Q, and cytochrome C. Here's your key right here. So that's what's called the electron transport chain. Then there's this guy, I call him sleepyhead, because he's sleeping on the job. And that's called ATP synthase. Pay attention with me, please. And that's called ATP synthase. And it carries out a chemical reaction called chemiosmosis. That's what makes ATP. Unfortunately, however, he's sleeping on the job. And we need to wake him up. Now, a lot of students complain to the professor, why is cellular respiration, why do you make it so difficult? I don't make it. I just tell you what it is. I didn't make this up. You should not blame your professor, you should blame sleepyhead. Everything that we're doing and all the complexity of cellular respiration is to wake him up to do his job. I wish this guy was awake to begin with. This thing would be done in 1 minute. But everything that we're doing, all of what you're about to hear has to do with waking him up. Because once he wakes up, there's one thing about him, he's very good at making ATP. Now notice where this machinery is. In bacteria, it's in the cell membrane. What about in our cells? It's in the inner membrane of the mitochondria. Oh, wait a minute, that should ring a bell. Could I use that as supporting evidence of endosymbiosis? Of course I can. The inner membrane of your mitochondria, yeah, used to be the cell membrane of the endosymbiont, the bacteria that underwent endosymbiosis. It came in like this. And then the membrane became the inner membrane of the mitochondria. So it's not a surprise, actually. But now we say, in eukaryotic cells, this machinery called oxidative phosphorylation, which is made up of the electron transport chain plus chemiosmosis, is found in the inner membrane of the mitochondria in eukaryotes, but in the cell membrane of bacteria. But how they work is exactly the same. Thank God. Now watch it work now. Look at this. The 10 NADHs will deliver the electrons and hydrogen to complex 1. Mainly the electrons, the complex 1. Complex 1 will receive the electrons, and the electrons will cause a change to complex 1 to open up a channel, and complex 1 will start pumping hydrogen from the cytoplasm here to this space called the periplasmic space here. So when complex 1 receives electrons, it responds to those electrons by pumping hydrogen. And then complex 1 says, well, I'm done. Ubiquinone, yeah, come over here, take them. So ubiquinone will then take the electrons from complex 1 and deliver them to complex 3. And that's why this is called the electron transport chain, because it's a chain of complexes transporting electrons from one complex to the other. So complex 1 delivers the electrons to ubiquinone. Ubiquinone delivers the electrons to complex 3. Complex 3 will do exactly like what complex 1 did. It will open up a channel, pump hydrogen, and then deliver the electrons to cytochrome C. Cytochrome C gives the electrons to complex 4. Complex 4 pumps hydrogen. So 1, 3, and 4 are pumping hydrogen in this space. What are they trying to create?
A gradient?
A gradient. What's the name of that gradient? It's a chemical, but it's charged.
Electrochemical.
Say it.
Electrochemical.
The electrochemical gradient. Absolutely. Let me write it down for you. Electrochemical gradient. It is a gradient. A gradient means high concentration on one side, low concentration on the other side. Yeah, that is true. High concentration of hydrogen here, low concentration of hydrogen here. Yeah, that's fine. But it's charged. So that's called an electrochemical gradient. I tell my Gen Bio students all the time, and you're no different. You know what the cell just created? It created a battery. That's what it created. It created a battery, yeah, that it will use, yeah, to wake this guy up. It's amazing. It is no different than the battery in your car right now. Hopefully you go to your car, you put your key in there, and you rely on your battery to start your car. Same thing. Your cell is creating a battery that will drive this guy. So we created the battery from NADH. So now I have to write this for you guys. NADH pumps hydrogen from complex 1, 3, and 4. Okay. Let's see what FADH2 does. FADH2 does not know anything about complex 1. It goes directly to complex 2. FADH2 goes to complex 2. You can make a song out of it. How's that? It delivers the electrons to complex 2, but you gotta catch this part. Complex 2 does not pump hydrogen. All complex 2 does is give the electrons to ubiquinone. That's it. The rest of it is exactly the same. The electrons go to complex 3. Complex 3 gives the electrons to cytochrome C. Cytochrome C gives the electrons to complex 4. It's only 3 and 4 that are pumping hydrogen when FADH2 is involved. So I'm going to write that here. When FADH2 is involved, only 3 and 4 are pumping hydrogen. Ah, that makes sense. Look over here. This guy is creating a bigger battery, a more charged battery than this one is. This is equivalent to you charging your battery overnight, your cell phone. Overnight, you'll have it the whole day to use. Compared to this one, you're charging it for 2 hours. You'll only be able to use it for a little bit. That's why I make 3 ATPs from the NADH, because I have a stronger battery. Compared to 2 ATPs from FADH2, I have a weaker battery. It's phenomenal. It's amazing how this thing works. Nice question on an exam. NADH makes 3 ATPs. Why? Because it creates a greater electrochemical gradient because it pumps hydrogen from 1, 3, and 4. Where FADH2 creates a weaker electrochemical gradient because it only pumps from 3 and 4. That's why the yield is the way you see it. All right, so hang on, look up here. We got the electrons up to here so far. Something has to take the electrons at the end. This is mandatory. And it's the oxygen that you're breathing. And that's why you're breathing. Do you notice something? Oxygen, when we were talking about pyruvate at the end of glycolysis, we just checked to see if oxygen was there. Oxygen was not involved in anything until now. We call oxygen the final electron acceptor. After complex 4, someone has to take the electrons. And it's the oxygen that you're breathing. And that's why I checked to see if oxygen was there. Because can you imagine me doing all of this? The pyruvate oxidation, the citrate and the isocitrate and the alpha ketoglutarate, the succinyl-CoA, succinate, fumarate, malate, oxide. Are you kidding me? And I give the electrons to complex 1 and the electrons to complex 2, and everything is happening, and all of a sudden, there is no oxygen. Bad news. This cell dies right away. Why? Because everything backs up. The whole system backs up. And the cell dies. You must give the electrons to oxygen to keep it moving. Otherwise, the whole thing shuts down. And when oxygen gets electrons and hydrogen, look what it becomes: water. Cyanide, the poison cyanide, that's how it kills. Cyanide blocks this step right here. And that's what I just told you. Oxygen must get the electrons to keep it moving. So any form of cyanide introduction, you inhale it, God forbid, whatever, you don't survive that. And it works really fast. Cyanide will block this step. So complex 4 cannot give the electrons to oxygen, and the whole thing shuts down. And you won't have ATP to survive. By the way, the same thing happens to the electrons given off by NADH. They will also end up in oxygen, and oxygen will become water. So the amazing thing is this. The glucose that you eat, you literally do this to it. You release it as CO2. All 6 carbons of glucose will be lost as CO2. 2 in pyruvate oxidation, yeah? And the other 4, the Krebs cycle. So the glucose that you eat, you will literally breathe out as CO2 garbage. The oxygen that you breathe in, it just turned into water. Because that's what you're doing here. Why is all of this important? Because what's the objective of cellular respiration? It's to make ATP. Good? No? I'll check on Thursday. All right.